Rob Cooper, First News, Prince Rupert.
Rand Assad, First News, at the Deep Creek Hatchery.
For CFTK-TV News in Terrace, I'm Tyler Noble.
For Health Watch, I'm Kathy Brooks.
For CFTK-TV News, I'm Sarah Consmo in Prince Rupert.
For CFTK-TV News, I'm Artie Cole in Terrace.
For CFTK-TV News in Smithers, I'm Sarah Comedina.
I'm Mike Kelly reporting. Now let's send it back to the studio.
Hi, I'm Hillary Johnson, and welcome to Flashback, where we take a look at local stories from years gone by. Today we go back to July 16th, 1990, when a new forestry method was explored to reduce the impact of clear cutting.
There's a different type of mechanical beast eating up Northwest forests, a logging machine that's new to the region. Right now, it's the only logging operation of its kind in the Northwest, but more will likely follow. Because as logging goes, this machine is environmentally friendly. And the forest industry is under growing public pressure to reduce the environmental damage caused by logging operations. Now, logging can hardly be called an environmentally friendly activity, especially clear-cut logging, which, by definition, destroys most living things in its path. But clear-cutting with this machine, called Skyline logging, seems to minimize the ecological damage associated with clear-cut operations. The Skyline logging system was developed in the United States, where environmental protection measures for the forests have traditionally been much more stringent than here in BC.
They use them a lot down there in the States. That probably 99% of their highly logging is done with Skyline yards. They're probably 15, 20 years ahead of us in, I suppose, ecology things and that, as far as to protect the land and wildlife things. And they yard lots more buffer strips and that where it's selective logging type things, where they have to pull wood sideways and totally suspend it over other standing stuff.
There are other Skyline operations in use elsewhere in BC, but this is the only one now being used in the Northwest. The contractor is working for Skeena Cellulose of Terrace. The company, also known as Repap, has been instrumental in bringing Skyline logging to the Northwest.
Well, Repap, and particularly Skeena Cellulose, we like to think that we're on the leading edge of the development of whether it's milling or logging systems. We believe that we can't stand still. We have to respond not only to economic pressures, but we have to respond to environmental pressures and public pressures and things like that. And we see a lot of potential in this system to help us, particularly environmentally, but also probably economically over the long term once we learn how to run the system properly.
The principle behind the Skyline system is the same as other logging methods. Get the timber to a landing, where it's then hauled away by logging trucks. It's the way it's done that's unique. The heart of the operation is the Sky Car, sort of a high-tech, remote-controlled winch that runs along a cable. It free falls from the tower, along a cable, down into the valley bottom, a half-mile below, where the operator stops it above the fallen trees. Then, by remote control, the choker cables are dropped from the Sky Car. Workers on the ground attach the cables to the logs. The winch is again triggered by remote control, lifting the logs off the ground, and the Sky Car and its load are winched back up the mountainside to the landing. What Skyline logging does that other systems do not is lift the logs off the ground, suspending them in the air before moving them to the landing. By not dragging the logs along the ground, there's less damage to the soil cover, less environmental impact. And there's other pluses to the Skyline system as well.
The sort of benefits that we're expecting is in building less road, which means less dollars in roads, also means less environmental degradation from roads. We're expecting less soil and site damage from the yarding process, and we're expecting less breakage of the timber. and hence a better recovery and less waste in the bush. Also, the type of benefits we are seeing right here in this sow here that you're looking at is we can bring the timber right across a creek and still leave a timbered buffer strip along the creek, which again protects the creek, protects the downstream fisheries values, and at the same time allows us to access the timber.
Those are the benefits to Skyline logging over conventional high-lead logging methods, but there are a few aspects of the Skyline system that Northwest contractors are keeping an eye on before deciding whether to get more involved with this style of logging. The first is cost. This equipment is used, purchased second-hand down in the States. Still, it cost $1 million. And then there's the expense of running the Skyline operation, $3,500 a day for the yarder and ground crews. And of course, being a new system to the area, the crews have to be trained, and that's time-consuming. Until they're proficient, production is not at optimum levels. However, from what he's seen so far, the contractor is optimistic about Skyline logging.
We have a pretty good feeling that it'll do well. It's a matter of teaching all our people, and that I guess the new style of logging. It's just like a brand new game. And to do that is going to take a certain amount of time, but we feel confident that within a year that we can have it up to the point where it will probably compete closely with the regular high-lead logging if you take into account, you know, all the things that go with it, you know, that there's savings and road building costs and that, you know, all considered, it should be competitive or better than regular high-lead, or we're hoping it would.
There are a couple of factors that may offset some of the extra costs associated with Skyline logging. The first is road building costs. Skyline operations, as a rule, require 1/3 less roads to access the timber stands than do other methods of logging. And road building is one of the most expensive components of any timber removal operation. Road building is also one of the most environmentally damaging aspects of logging. Another consideration is the amount of timber that can be reached. In some cases, timber stands that can't be accessed using conventional logging practices can be utilized with the Skyline system.
It is going to be more expensive, but for example, out of this valley here, Shannon Creek, there's probably 10% more volume that we'll be able to remove over 20 years than we would otherwise, simply because the wood gets so hard to get with conventional logging system. It's just not economic to touch it. You just can't. Whereas with this system, it becomes economic. So in one sense, to log this timber that's right close to the landing here, it is more expensive. To log the stuff on the other side of the valley, it's cheaper.
And in the long run, 10% more wood.
That's right. That's a very rough guess, but there is more volume available if we use this system.
Timber harvesting methods have come a long way since the days of the double-headed axes, the springboard, and the two-man cross-cut saws. Now it's remote-controlled radio-frequency sky cars costing $100,000 each. But then public demands on the forest industry have also changed over the years. What was once acceptable in terms of environmental degradation is now against the law. People in BC realize the value of the economic benefits that come from the forest industry. But along with those benefits, they also want healthy forests to grow again.
The United States have used the Skyline system for probably 15 or 20 years, primarily due to environmental pressure, not because they wanted to or thought it was a better way. They had to, or they couldn't log the ground. They were just told they couldn't. And plus they had some lot higher quality timber to deal with, that they could afford to pay the high price it cost them to learn how to run these things and develop them. We're hoping we're a step ahead of that. We want to learn how to do this, not just because we're forced to, but because we want to, and because it's good for us, good for the environment, good for everybody.
As the public attitude changes, so too does the practices of the forest industry. If Skyline logging can live up to its billing as a timber harvesting method that can, in many instances, reduce the amount of environmental damage, then it's a system you're likely to see more and more of in the years to come.
Oh, I think quite definitely. It's the logging of the future. It doesn't work everywhere. That, you know, the major concern with a system like this is to develop enough deflection in that to suspend your lines and your wood so we can haul the wood over the creeks and that and not be knocking down buffer strips and create a lot less ground disturbance, all that stuff, which is becoming more important every day as far as environmental issues and that.